Balancing has gotta be a two-way thing, right? You can have a character or an item or something that's really good and fun to use, but if it's incredibly obnoxious to fight against, well, that doesn't really work. The general consensus is that it's better to buff the bad things than it is to make the good things worse. Let's not make everything equally bad. But what if something is genuinely too good, or flawed in concept? Then what? Well, you can take a page from the Valve playbook and nerf it into the ground. Perhaps the worst part about TF2's slow balancing process is that an overpowered weapon will usually remain overpowered for quite some time, and if it does get nerfed to a point where it's underpowered, well, you can bet that it's going to stay that way for even longer. Sure, this whole balancing thing can be a gradual process. You could try something out on a weapon, and if it doesn't work, that's a-okay. But don't just leave it that way. Look at the Darwin's Danger Shield. When item set bonuses were removed, they gave the Danger Shield 15% bullet resistance on wearer. The main point of this was to allow a sniper to just barely survive quickscope headshots from another sniper. This is similar to the Croco Style's original set bonus that the wearer could not be killed by headshots. When that was in effect, a headshot would just bring you down to 1 HP. So they ended up finding some way to bring a version of that over to the Danger Shield, which was originally a very bland weapon, just being plus 25 health on wearer. The change doesn't necessarily sound bad in theory. All you would have to do is just charge a little bit before you could kill another sniper with a headshot. But you're still giving the sniper a weapon that primarily acts as a counter to other snipers. And what's sniper's only real ranged counter? It's other snipers. You would need to equip the Danger Shield if you didn't want enemy snipers who were using it to have the advantage. This became clear very soon after the change was made. And alright, it was a clever enough idea, but it didn't work. Fine. It took them 4 years to change it again. You know how many millions of people died in that time? Alright, they finally changed the Danger Shield and even explained a reason why. I'm not a huge fan of the current version, but I'll take it. What may be a bit surprising is that even when the TF2 team makes a bad change regarding an overpowered weapon, they'll usually identify what the problem was, but too often they just go too far. The Babyface's Blaster comes to mind. With the original version of the Blaster, you were giving up damage for speed. The only way to lose boost was by jumping, and just one jump would completely remove it. It was an interesting weapon, though slightly underwhelming. But in the 2 Cities update, it was way overbuffed, reducing or removing its previous downsides and making the main drawback a smaller clip size, now giving the super speed with no damage costs. And this version is way less interesting, to me at least. It remained this way for about 1.5 years. But when the Nerf hammer came, it came down hard, increasing the boost lost on air jump and making it so your boost is now reduced from taking damage. The idea here, I guess, is that the Babyface's Blaster can make you super fast, but you could lose that speed by getting hit. So just don't get hit. I think I would prefer that they went back and tried to adjust the original version, but okay. The problem here is that it only takes 25 damage to drain all your boost. It takes 100 damage to fill it, but a single pistol shot's gonna reduce it by over half. But why though? Someone decided to make it 25. You could just change a few numbers and this weapon could probably be pretty good. Now that Babyface's Blaster nerf came in Gunmetal, which is an update I usually point to as having some of the best balancing put into a single update. But most of the highlights there were buffs. You also got some very big nerfs to the Enforcer and the Loch-n-Load. And generally I'd say the TF2 team has a better track record with their buffs, but their previous improvements on the Babyface's Blaster and the Loch-n-Load is what led to them getting over-nerfed later on. Well, I guess the current version of the Loch-n-Load isn't terrible, but both that and the Blaster are cases of them trying to work off a new version of the weapon, when realistically it's probably better to go back to the original version and then try to work off it from there. And only recently have we seen them revert weapons like the Clay Gemor and the Righteous Bison, with the previous changes to those weapons just being bad. Removing the only thing that was unique about the Clade and then nerfing the Righteous Bison into the ground despite it not being anything close to overpowered. I mean, seriously, the only explanation I've ever seen for that change was that they thought it was too powerful when paired with the Kritzkrieg. And I kinda doubt that, but even if that were the case, if anything, you'd just give it a penalty like the Cowmangler's mini crits when it would normally crit penalty and then call it a day. But the whole nerf got reverted, sorta, they kinda messed that up. Even the Criticola ended up being closer to how it started, which is certainly better balance-wise than what it had become. The Criticola is a weapon that wasn't awful or anything when it came out, but nobody really used it, so it ended up getting buffed. And then still not that many people used it, and then it got buffed again, and then again! And then you had a super drink that just instantly killed anybody within a 5-mile radius anytime you used it. Okay, well that might be a slight exaggeration. Usage stats can certainly be a part of how you go about balancing things, but that can't be the only thing you go off of. Even at the height of its overpoweredness, I still didn't see the Criticola all that often in the average pub. You could look at a weapon like the Sharpened Volcano Fragment and say, hey, nobody really uses this, so maybe we should do something about it. But you could also look at a weapon like the Soda Popper and say, well, this isn't a super popular weapon, but it's also still really good. So don't buff it. And there's still a bunch of other examples of weapons that were either added too good or became that way through updates that end up being torn down at different points in the game's history. The Pretty Boy's Pocket Pistol, a very good weapon, not necessarily overpowered, but it ended up breaking a rule that weapons that aren't visible at all times can't give passive health increases or damage resistance. The second version of that weapon was vastly inferior and not very good at all. The Equalizer was split into two weapons, leaving the Equalizer half as a weapon that somehow manages to be worse than the stock shovel half the time. The Reserve Shooter went from too good on Pyro to more or less worthless on that class because they took away the only thing that made it good. Same with the Tommyslav and the Pyromania update, dropping the faster spin up from 40% to an almost unnoticeable 10%. Thankfully, it ended up being buffed in Gunmetal, which was 3 years later. The Natasha went from massively slowing targets from across the map to some weird jumbled mess of stats. They thought the Ambassador was too good at long range, but ended up making it worthless outside of close range. The Extinguisher paired super well with the Degreaser, and they nerfed both of them in the same update. The Deadringer got some pretty major nerfs at different points in different updates, etc, etc. And don't think stock weapons were exempt from this. I mean, they largely were, but let's not forget about the Love and War Sticky Bomb nerf. Giving all Sticky Bombs 2 seconds of damage ramp up after being fired until they reached the regular damage. Now, the Sticky Bomb launcher was certainly more of a controversial weapon earlier in the game's life. It was very, very powerful when the game came out, and it did end up getting nerfed a few times even before Love and War. The Sticky Bomb launcher's offensive power was cut dramatically, and this had probably the biggest backlash to any single balance change that I can remember. Even if you thought stickies were too good, this was still going too far. It ended up being reverted a few days later and replaced with much more reasonable nerfs later that year. And, I guess that's it for this video. Wait a minute! You didn't think I forgot the Sandman, did you? It's not in the title just because I couldn't think of a better name. The Sandman has the title of being, well, in my opinion at least, both the most brokenly overpowered weapon ever put in this game, and the most nerfed weapon. The original Sandman is one of the most bafflingly terrible designs for a weapon that I've ever seen. Completely removing the target's ability to move at all, and stunning uber-charged players as a feature, at the cost of no double jump. Of course, it did end up getting changed over the years. Stunned targets could now move a little bit, and the penalty was changed. But let's not pretend that pre-Jungle Inferno Sandman was okay just because it lasted that way for a long time. This weapon still removed your ability to fight back with the fastest projectile in the game, and there really wasn't any kind of counter to it. So long as the scout had decent enough aim, you got hit by it. I mean, I guess you could get Ubered to block it, and a Pyro could air blast the ball, but how often does that really happen? And can we just look at what that thing did to Heavy? The slowest, biggest class? A spun-up Heavy has effectively no way to dodge that ball and can barely move after being hit. Any scout with halfway decent aim could decimate Heavies with a Sandman at the cost of 15 health. Even if you liked that version of the weapon, and I think it was fun to use, but could you justify its existence without bringing up that it is fun to use, and that it has been that way for a long time? But when you have a weapon that can take away an enemy's ability to fight back, it's probably not going to be fun to fight. Unfortunately, when you have a weapon with a fundamental flaw like that, trying to fix it is inevitably going to end up with it being less interesting and far less powerful. They did a few things to try to soften the blow of removing stunning, like reducing the ball recharge time and upping the damage dealt on long-range hits, but it can't really compare. Slowing your target isn't a bad ability, and I don't know if I'd say the current Sandman is absolutely terrible, but the duration of the slow won't usually be that long, especially at closer ranges, and you're also giving up health to use it. The health penalty is kind of staple of the weapon at this point. I guess the stun was too. But if you were going to replace the penalty with a more boring stat, like say 20% damage vulnerability when active, it wouldn't be a bad weapon at all. It would just be a really watered down and much blander version of what the Sandman once was. And in this case at least, that might be for the best. Anyway, this is over. Write your local congressman and tell them to fix the Sandman. Or don't. I'm fine. I'm fine with it the way it is. Best ending. Nailed it.